Okay, let's unpack this. You sent over a really thought-provoking document. It's examining whether law enforcement should ever use tactics that, push legal boundaries to go after hardcore criminals.
Yeah, it's a really complex question, right? A lot to consider there.
Definitely. We've got articles, legal definitions here, some crime stats. It looks like a real deep dive is ahead of us.
hmm
Our mission, I guess, is to understand the arguments for this kind of approach, but maybe more importantly, see what the data and the legal precedent and the ethical side actually tell us.
Right. And you mentioned wanting to get informed quickly, but like thoroughly without getting totally overwhelmed.
Exactly. So we'll try to pull out the crucial nuggets and, connect the dots.
Okay. So where do we start? Maybe with who these hardcore criminals even are.
Good idea. Because interestingly, the document points out there's no single legal definition. That kind of surprised me.
Me too.
Yeah.
You see terms like habitual offender, which often means, what, 3 or more felony convictions?
Yeah, something like that. And career criminal, and even really specific phrases like hardcore sexual conduct tied to certain statutes.
And criminology throws in broader ideas to habitual offenders, just as frequent convicts, hardcore juvenile offenders with these long histories of antisocial behavior.
Right, even folks with extreme ideologies.
Yeah.
Violent true believers, sovereign citizens.
So what's fascinating right off the bat is that the very definition of who we're even talking about is, well, it's a bit fuzzy, isn't it?
It really is, which seems important if you're talking about bending rules for them.
Absolutely. And the document seems to suggest the system maybe isn't effective enough against these individuals, hence the potential need for extra measures.
Okay, so what's the evidence for that? Does it give numbers?
It does. It brings up some FBI data from 2019 looking at clearance rates, so like how many reported crimes get solved.
Uh-huh.
Murder was cleared at about 61.4%, which sounds okay maybe, but robbery was only 30.5%.
Wow, okay. That's a big drop.
Yeah, and property crimes were even lower. Plus, and this is kind of key, clearance rates for violent crimes actually went down between 2013 and 2022.
So not getting better, potentially getting worse in some areas.
Seems that way. And then there's the whole dark figure of crime, the crimes that don't get reported.
Right. How much are we talking about?
Well, in 2022, the estimate was only about 40% of violent crimes and just 30% of property crimes were actually reported to police.
So the official stats are really just the tip of the iceberg. It does paint a picture of a tough fight, surface level anyway.
It does. And the document uses this interesting phrase, a street fighter mentality of criminals.
Huh. What does that mean in this context?
It describes street fights as, unpredictable, using dirty tactics, driven by raw aggression. The implication being maybe police need to fight fire with fire sometimes.
I see the comparison. But law enforcement isn't a street fighter, right? There are rules, accountability.
Exactly. And the document acknowledges that, too. It talks about how police counter this with things like de-escalation training, community policing, intelligence-led approaches.
Yeah, and that whole shift towards a guardian mindset, focusing on building community trust.
Right. So comparing trained officers to, untrained street fighters, it feels like a bit of a leap to say that unpredictability necessitates bending the rules.
Yeah, it does. But you also have to factor in the pressure on police to perform, right? That's real.
Oh, definitely. Traditionally, it's all about the numbers.
Yeah.
Crime rates, arrests, those clearance rates we mentioned.
Systems like CompStat track this stuff intensely.
Right. And there's even the controversial issue of arrest quotas, or at least informal pressure to meet certain targets.
And that focus on numbers. It can create an incentive maybe to prioritize actions that are easily counted, sometimes maybe at the expense of ethical stuff.
That's the potential risk, yeah.
Yeah.
Which brings us to where it gets really interesting and, frankly, pretty concerning. The document actually discusses specific tactics on the edge. It mentions planting evidence and paying informants with illegal substances.
Whoa. Okay, let's be super clear here. Planting evidence isn't just skirting the edge.
Not at all. The document notes, in California, for instance, it's a felony for an officer. We're talking potential prison time.
And ethically. I mean, it just destroys trust, right?
Uh-huh.
And could lead to wrongful convictions, massive harm.
Absolutely devastating. And paying informants with drugs, that's also legally and ethically just. deeply problematic. You could be coercing vulnerable people, even enabling more crime.
Yeah, that sounds incredibly risky.
The document even touches on things like curbstone justice and summary execution, basically taking the law into your own
That
hands.
sounds like vigilantism. Completely illegal, obviously.
Totally illegal in the U.S. It violates fundamental due process rights guaranteed by the Constitution. You can't just bypass the whole system.
And even less extreme, but still aggressive tactics, they risk bumping up against the Constitution too, right? Like the Fourth Amendment.
Exactly. Unreasonable search and seizure. And the Fifth Amendment due process, self-incrimination.
Which is why we have things like the exclusionary rule, isn't it? To stop illegally obtained evidence from being used in court.
Precisely. It's meant to be a crucial safeguard against exactly these kinds of overreaches.
So when you put it all together,
Yeah.
what does this add up to?
Well, the document itself actually acknowledges the huge cost of police misconduct. It explicitly states that it erodes public trust and undermines the legitimacy of law enforcement.
Especially, it notes, in minority communities where trust might already be fragile.
Right. And rebuilding that trust, it requires transparency, accountability, and a real focus on those community relationships.
So this deep dive, it really lays bare a serious tension. On one hand, the desire to tackle serious crime is completely valid. Nobody disputes that.
Oh, of course not.
But this exploration of legally questionable tactics,
Yeah.
it just slams right into fundamental principles of justice. And the potential for doing real damage to public trust seems enormous.
Yeah. And that lack of a clear definition for who these tactics would even target, combined with the risks of violating rights, the damage to police legitimacy, it paints a really complex and frankly dangerous picture.
So what's the takeaway then? Does the document offer any solutions or recommendations?
It does conclude with some key points. It emphasizes ethical conduct above all, using more holistic performance metrics, not just arrests,
Okay.
explicitly prohibiting illegal tactics, making it crystal clear those are off the table, reaffirming due process, investing in trust-building efforts.
And talking with communities, not just at them.
Exactly. Ongoing dialogue.
Which really leaves us and you, the listener, with a pretty big question to chew on, doesn't it? In the long run, what truly makes a community safer and ensures justice? Is it, bending the rules in the heat of the moment, trying to get that immediate result?
Or is it sticking rigidly, unwaveringly to the principles that underpin our whole legal system, even when things get really tough, even when facing the most challenging circumstances?
Yeah, it's definitely something to mull over.
And then unfortunately you might find yourself in a situation where you cannot find representation when you've been unjustly wronged, convicted, arrested, tried. You find out then you have no recourse in the ordinary course of the law. And then you're stuck trying to figure out, how would you ever get justice? Is this system designed for justice or just them? That's my question.